Welcome to the Expanding Consciousness podcast with your hosts, Michael Wally and Nicholas Haag. In this podcast, we explore ways to sharpen our awareness, make life more enjoyable, be a little kinder, become more authentic, less reactive, more present, and ultimately expand our consciousness. We're happy to have you along for the ride, and if you do enjoy these conversations, please leave a review or a comment, as this goes a long way for us. Enough of the promotional talk and enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking about what I consider probably one of the most important topics that we touch on, and that's embodied spirituality, or you might put it like everyday spirituality, practical spirituality. So, Nick, what do your spiritual practices look like, say, when you're at work or sitting in traffic or in your commute or something, right?
Good question. So I would start with stating what it doesn't look like. So it doesn't look like lighting patchouli sticks and plays. For me, not even doing mantras in my head or any kind of positive thinking that might be a stereotypical thing that people connect with spirituality. But I guess for me, it's just maybe an attitude or a position I take where I try to stay aware or conscious even in everyday situations, in particular in challenging situations which happen throughout the day for me often, even like at work, at my work, which has nothing to do with spirituality almost at all. My work as a software developer. Yeah, I guess my goal with spirituality and how I'm trying to embody it is just by staying aware, staying present as much as I can, and not trying to get lost in, whatever the day throws at you. Obviously, that still happens a lot, and this is a matter of practice. But yeah, I try to use my everyday life as a practice for spirituality as well. How about you?
Yeah. One thing I really like that you said there is that it's sort of more of an attitude, or I've even described it to others as like a posture that you're taking towards life. And I think that's really, really good way to describe it just in general. But to answer your question, what does it look like for me? I'm really keen on slogans, or just kind of having sayings that kind of help, that I refer back to when I'm struggling with something. So I'm real keen on something called Lojong, which is Tibetan Buddhist mind training. Basically, it's just a set of slogans that kind of help you. They're like guardrails for your conduct, I guess you could say. For example, one of the slogans, probably one of the most challenging ones, is drive all blames into one, which essentially means that you're willing to take blame for almost anything, or, at the extreme end, anything, right? So to me, for example, like at work, if something goes wrong and people are pointing fingers, I might step up, and I won't necessarily like take on, I won't say that I did something I didn't do, right? But I might try to take responsibility for that and see, like, okay, how can I help solve this problem? It doesn't matter who caused the problem. It doesn't matter if it's going to be a pain in my butt or something, right? But how can I do something to help this without, getting caught up in this game of just throwing the blame around, right? I guess that's kind of a really big point just in general, is not blaming anyone else, anything external, not blaming events, not blaming circumstances, not blaming the actions of other people for anything that's bothering me, right? Even if someone says something and then it triggers me, I do my best not to blame them for that, but rather see that, okay, there was something inside of me already. I already had some baggage, and this person just ran into it. They didn't know any better, right? And so I try to really just own that.
It sounds a bit like you're taking radical responsibility, or that this is what you try to achieve, which I do resonate a lot with. I think that's one of the first things when I got into spirituality was to face my own stuff and my own things that I avoided for a long time, and in general taking responsibility for your own life, like getting out of that oh, life is happening to me, life is unfair, these circumstances are unfair, and developing a sort of an attitude towards life from that to saying, okay, I do have ownership in my life and I do have agency in my life, but I need to take responsibility. And that obviously means taking responsibility also for the shitty stuff, right?
Mhm.
Or in
Yeah.
what you describe, to even taking the blame in some cases. Um, okay, that's a interesting concept I didn't know about. Is there any other sentences you follow?
Yeah. So I really like this idea that all we really control is the inputs into the situation, right? So in any given situation, you can decide kind of how you show up and what you do, but you really can't necessarily decide the result, right? Like you can influence it, obviously, but you don't necessarily decide it. So this also kind of goes along with um, not like claiming the fruits of your action, right? Or not seeing the result as the almost in a sense, and this is almost, this is a little bit weird, but not seeing the result as the goal, right? It's really more, and we hear this all the time in spirituality, right? Like it's not the destination, it's the process. It's traveling to the destination. It's more important than the actual destination. And so, I think this is something that the Tao Te Ching says a lot, right? To give up the fruits of your action, right? Which is not an easy thing to do. So one thing I'd kind of throw out there, just as I guess as a little bit of a caveat, is everything that I'm talking about here. By no means would I say that it's easy to do, right? Like you're not doing it perfectly. I am not like total. I'm not perfect in any of this, right? It's something that I like to say I aspire towards it, right? It's like these higher, loftier goals that I try to uphold, right? And then the kind of the meat of the practice ends up being, okay, when I don't live up to that, what's getting in the way? What can I let go of? It's usually some sort of identification. And so that wasn't fair. That wasn't, that was not just or something. And then getting hung up on that story. That's kind of what often gets in the way of actually being able to, you know, do all of these things that we're talking about here.
Hmm. How do you deal with, for example, conflicts that come up at work? And I mean, like interpersonal conflicts, like really conflicts with other people, because this seems to me the most difficult part, at least of my job, is always dealing with people, because people have
Yeah.
personalities, they have egos, um, they have goals and so on, and that complicates it. What do you do when you run into a conflict?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess I'll share a little bit of a story here because it's one that I often kind of think back to and feel like I did a fairly good job eventually, right? Initially, not so much, right? But I was working on this project, kind of cross collaborating with another team, and there was kind of a lack of communication between me and my my counterpart on this other team. And there was something that I needed from him in this case, just for a little bit of context, it was a code review, right? Like he owned the section of the code and I needed, I made some pretty significant changes and I needed him to review it and kind of move it through. And I was getting pressure from my manager, like, okay, we need to get this through. We need to get this done. We need to land this code. And so I was kind of pushing on him like, okay, can you get this done? And it felt like he was just, you know, being very nitpicky. He'd say like, "Oh, well, what about this?" And then I'd go and fix that immediately, and then I wouldn't be able to get his attention again for a couple hours. I mean, he had his own work, of course, and it ended up going really slow, and I was finding myself really frustrated all the time. I mean, we were in different offices; we weren't like face to face or anything. This was, more or less remote, and it was just really challenging. There was a lot of there was kind of some animosity between the two teams, a little bit kind of historical, but it it didn't go very smoothly in general. Eventually, he did finally approve my code after all the appropriate changes and everything. But it just didn't go super well. But the part that I think I kind of brought it home, or really turned it into a more beneficial opportunity, was eventually we had a retrospective, right? Which was basically looking back and what could we have done better. And my intention going into that retrospective was to just do this radical ownership thing. Like, essentially, I would list out all of the problems that I saw, and I would say what I could have done differently without saying what I think the other person should have done. Even if it was something that I really felt like the other person caused this problem, or whatever, I wouldn't say that. I would just say, okay, here was one of the problems, and here is what I could have done differently. And I did it in like a very sincere way. I didn't do it like, well, I could have told you to do your job or something. That's what I could have done differently, right? Because that would be like a cop out. It would be more like, okay, I could have communicated better up front. I could have, worked better towards alignment. I could have worked towards understanding the other person's concerns better to find out, well, like, okay, why is this taking so long? Instead of just being frustrated that it was taking so long. And that approach actually, it worked really well in the retrospective. So the other, my counterpart, he was there, and I think I earned a lot of respect in doing that. And he kind of followed suit. Initially going into the meeting, there was a little bit of apprehension that, okay, this is just we're just going to be blaming each other back and forth, and it's just not going to go very well. But I kind of presented first. I presented my case, and it was like, these are the things I could have done better. And then the other person, they kind of turned around and matched that, and they were like, oh, these are the things that I could have done better. I basically took the blame for everything, so that was off the table, and it went pretty well. And so I've kind of tried to apply a similar approach just in general. I'm sure there are situations that it doesn't apply quite as easily, but that's my little story. That's my little spiel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes a long way if somebody shows in their attitude their, I guess, compassion, even in the face of a conflict. I have the feeling people have almost no chance, but also to react back in a positive way. And this example that you explained shows it well. Although I'm still interested. So you had kind of a conflict, and then you explained how you resolved it through communication. But how did you deal, with the part of you being pissed to the point that you're able to communicate it well, if you were even pissed? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I was definitely irritated at times, and I would kind of vent to one of my coworkers nearby. And interestingly, someone who was on the other guy's team was sitting nearby, and so he overheard a lot of this, and that did not do well for me, right? Because eventually it got communicated to my counterpart, and he received it pretty well, in spite of the fact that I just was not conducting myself as I would have liked to. But specifically to your question, like, how do you deal with the anger? How do you deal with the frustration, or any uncomfortable emotion? Honestly, at the time, I was not very good at it. And I would say that I was able to just be in a better mindset when I went into the retrospective meeting, largely because the work was already done. And so there wasn't a whole lot for me to be upset about anymore, right? Like, I didn't need him to do the review or to get that done. So in that case, the emotional charge was just not as present. It had sort of already passed. And so it was much easier to, show up in a more, show up and own things a little bit better. But nowadays I'm honestly, I'd say that I've gotten really good at working with emotions when they come up. One of the things that is probably the most important thing to me, at least, that I've learned as far as working with emotions, and there's this tendency. It's a very, very strong tendency, and it's really hard to even recognize that it's happening. But there's this tendency to project your emotion, right? And it's blame.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's to say, you're the reason I'm feeling so bad. And so in a sense, we think that we're escaping feeling bad by blaming somebody else, but we're really giving away our power to change how we feel, because all of a sudden it's someone else's responsibility. And unless they actually do something different, then we've almost created a contract, like, oh, I'm going to be angry until you do this. Right. So it's so important. And it's also really difficult. It takes a lot of practice in doing this, but just to stop projecting the emotions out externally. I take it to an extreme, right? And I don't know if this is really true, but I look at it this way. I look at it as basically it's all on me, right? And this goes back to the idea of taking responsibility for everything to the best of your ability. And that's, if I feel bad about something, even if an external thing triggered it, I'm going to try to own that emotion. I'm going to say that, okay, sure, the external thing hit something, but that something was already in me, right? It was some childhood thing or whatever. And, chances are the other person didn't, of course they didn't know that. I didn't even know that was there. So how could I expect somebody else to know it's there? So they really don't deserve any blame whatsoever. They just accidentally tripped over one of my landmines,
Hmm.
right? It's not their fault. I mean, the landmine is mine. I might not have put it there intentionally, but now that I've become aware of it, rather than get entangled in the story, which is what I used to do, right? And eventually, one of the biggest motivations for doing so much of this is you start to realize the other things that I'm doing don't work. It doesn't work to blame other people. It doesn't, it really doesn't move things forward. It doesn't help you progress spiritually. So yeah, that was a really long-winded answer. I don't know if I even really
Yeah.
answered your specific question, but I'll hold there.
I think we're getting into the meat of the problem now. So yeah, you use the word tendency, which I like because I think it describes really well what happens. So when an emotion shows up and tries to overtake us, a tendency happens to do something. And if the tendency is very strong, it can even become tension in the body potentially later. But it's aiming us to do a certain thing. And if we able to recognize this tendency, we still have the freedom to act upon the tendency or not. However, the tendency sometimes or often is that strong that we don't even notice that moment, and the moment goes by and we are already in action. And this is somewhat problematic because I'd say that the behavior that comes out of unresolved past emotions is almost never constructive, right? I mean, it's like it's shitty reactions all the way, basically. And I think why this tendency develops usually is always because we are not agreeing anymore with whatever the outside reality is. So
Hmm.
let's stay with the example of your coworker not delivering on something, and this doesn't match your reality because your boss is pushing you to do the release or whatever, and you're in disagreement with whatever is happening, and you're like, I don't want that. I want to control my environment. I want to change the reality right now to this other thing. And for that, you're using this tendency and this energy. But if we're being honest, it never resolve things in a good way. I think this kind of energy always goes in the wrong direction. It almost never did something good for you. I mean, there is probably evolutionary a reason why anger exists. It can perhaps get you out of sketch situations. It could help you defend yourself. There's a reason, but most of the time when anger shows up in our life, especially if it's a product of like unresolved older anger, you know, then it has this childish quality to it as well. Where we're acting out um, perhaps some childish anger, which is even stronger and has even stronger tendencies and tends to break stuff. So I think it's the problem always happens when we start disagreeing with reality, but we cannot really disagree with reality because reality is reality, right? You don't have a choice really.
Yeah, I really like the way that you put that, where you're sort of disagreeing with reality. And it's like a totally futile position to put yourself into, right? Because I mean, and in a way, it is so childish. It's like, I don't want things to be the way that they are, right? And I mean, it's understandable, right? Because it's uncomfortable and we don't want to feel uncomfortable. I think a lot of that's kind of what, in my mind, that's what kind of motivates the compulsive action is it, in a way, it's kind of like an escape. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want things to be the way that they are. and now I'm going to try to do something to make it different, right? It's like I'm fighting with the world, and it's usually very unskillful action. It doesn't work very well. And the interesting thing about it, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, is that emotions like anger, they can serve a useful purpose when we're not responding to them compulsively, when we're not trying to get rid of the anger, when we're more accepting of it, right? I mean, so from my understanding, what I've come across before is that anger can be really useful for helping you set appropriate boundaries. Like sometimes the anger is actually a little bit directed at ourselves, for like, how did I let myself get into this situation? And this is something that I certainly relate to, being, I would say, a recovering people pleaser, right? There's a tendency for me to do things that I think will make other people, happy or like me or something. And oftentimes I'm putting myself out and doing that. And then I end up in this situation where I'm really unhappy, but the only person that I honestly have to blame at that point is myself, right?
Yeah. The question is, though, what's the alternative? So we do realize sometimes in reflection, okay, I'm acting in a really shitty way when I'm, taken by my emotions and by this tendency, and this clearly is not the way. This is usually a destructive destructive behavior that I'm implementing in my life, perhaps even a habit. Think about negative habits like, I don't know, drinking, smoking, all the things, all the strategies that people develop to. I'm disagreeing with reality, so I have this thing which I can change it right now, right? I mean, because you really can. With, I don't know, with smoking, you can take yourself quickly out of the mind space of a conflict, calm your nervous system very quickly, and this is your solution, and now you're in a different space. However, it's like very destructive. So what is actually the alternative? We realize, okay, we are disagreeing with whatever's happening in reality right now. Like, how do we get an agreement again?
Yeah. Uh, the funny thing is that it's honestly very, very simple. It's simple to say, right? To see how to come back into alignment, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And in some situations, it's the most possible challenging thing to do. And one of the ways that I would put what we're trying to do here is abandon your position, right? Like, we have this tendency of, once I've put something out there, once I've maybe said something, once I've kind of made a declaration, we have a tendency to then become identified with that, right? Like, I don't know if I'm coming up with a good example, but in any case, basically, we'll, think about like an argument, right? You're arguing with someone, and let's say halfway through the argument, you realize I'm wrong. Actually, the other person, they're correct in this situation. How many of us can actually, like, at that point, abandon our position and just say, you know what, I realize you're right? And one of the things that also makes that so difficult is other people almost have a need for our consistency, right? They need us to continue to identify with our position in a sense. Like, it can be very kind of disruptive if all of a sudden you're arguing with someone and they just go like, oh yeah, you're right. Just kind of, I mean, I guess it's destructive in a positive way, in the sense that it like makes it very easy for things to kind of just come apart and kind of come back into alignment. So I think really it's like a mental thing that's going on. We're holding on to something that we've built, some belief that we have, some proposition that we've put out into the world, and it is no longer true. It is no longer serving us. And this is another thing I like to say is, it's always good to question, okay, is this belief, is this whatever I put out there, is that serving me? Is that actually like a useful thing anymore? Because at some point, and this is the point where I think anything kind of becomes dogmatic, essentially, there's a point where it's no longer serving you, but you're serving it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's like, I've created this thing, I've created this proposition, I put it out into the world, I've found out now that it's not working, it's not serving me, it's wrong. But because I've identified with it, I put so much energy into it previously, I don't want to let it go, right? And that it's a really hard thing to do. And society and other people around us tend to like expect us to maintain our position, right? And so that doesn't make it any easier. But it also, honestly, it can kind of start to be fun, kind of almost in a way you're screwing with people sometimes, like, yeah, you're right. And it just kind of pulls the carpet out from underneath them, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's actually, it's funny that people expect us to hold our position. Like, I know what you mean. I know that's like a general expectation of people, and people tend to point it out, like inconsistencies in our opinion, right? So like, oh, but yesterday you said it like this. Well, yeah, I'm changing every day. As a matter of fact, I'm changing every second. I might as well change my position right now. And I think it would be actually a good thing to do. I think we are not static like that, and we always get new information. So obviously we're supposed to like change our point of view also all the time. Now, if you're being transparent about that with other people, for me that's like a one of the most positive qualities I recognize in people. So if I see people do that in real time, if they start to, suddenly agree with me when before they disagreed, I see that as a very positive character trait, if you want. So because they're being transparent about it, they're showing that it's okay to change their mind, and they're even, giving you credits back for your opinion. It's very similar, like being able to apologize, which is for some people
Yeah.
a very difficult skill. I mean, even for me included, I struggle with that. I don't know exactly why. I guess it's the ego, just being strong and not wanting to be malleable, because the ego also holds the same belief that, no, we should be static. This is what we said. We should hold on to it. Um, so in that way, it's really nice to see when people go that far, in communication to show you that.
Yeah, I think what makes it so difficult is our identifications, right? And they can be positive identifications, like, I mean, any identification, honestly, is not necessarily, they're all limiting. I guess I'll put it that way. But even if you identify, like, oh, I'm a good person, right? And then you go out and you do something that is not in alignment with that identification. And it's really hard to own that action honestly. It's hard to admit that you did something that was not in alignment with the way that you would like to be, right? Because you've got an image to uphold, or you believe you have an image to uphold. I'm a person that, never steals or something like that, right? And you go out and some circumstance happens where you steal, and you have a really hard time admitting it, right? You'll justify it to the end of the, to the end of the day. You'll just go like, no, 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 you don't understand, right? But it's very clearly you just were not living in alignment with the way that you want to, right? So I think a large part of what we're talking about is coming into alignment with how we would like to be. And that's not an easy thing to do, because our mind, our emotions, our body are not always in alignment with how we would like to be. It's not easy.
Yeah, it definitely isn't. So because it requires us to abandon the person that we created along the way. So to speak in Jungian terms, is what we call the persona. It is basically the persona that you develop during your first quarter or half of your life, that you are trying to build up. It's basically your personality. It includes your ego. It includes your personality traits. It includes your history, all that stuff that it took such a long time to build up, and perhaps you even created some success for yourself with it. You attach this persona to other people that are even like counting on this persona because they're very used to it. Perhaps they're even dependent on this persona. And in order to become more authentic, you need to kill this persona, basically,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, either quickly or slowly, but surely. But I think we want to arrive at a state where we as people, that you cannot put us into boxes. So that basically, I think the personality of people is, in fact, much less predictable than the personas that people create. And I think stepping into your own authenticity is, dropping the mask, letting all that old patterns go, and in each moment asking yourself, what is it that I actually want to do? How is it that I actually want to behave in these situations? Now you need to reevaluate, because in every situation we have this tendency that we described, that comes from your persona, but most likely this is not how you actually want to act if you're acting, out of a place of real awareness and not this learned thing persona.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I find slogans so powerful, right? And I mean, it can be anything, right? Find a slogan that works for you. For a while, I really liked "What would Jesus do?" Right? I mean, I'm not a big Christian or anything, but it's someone who I feel conducts themselves in such a way that I would like to also conduct myself in that way. And for you, maybe it's, what would my highest self do? What would my higher self do? What would, whoever that you look up to and that you see their conduct in such a way that you would like to be that way. I'm always asking myself, I'm kind of comparing myself to that and being like, okay, what's the delta? What's the change? What do I need to do in order to hold myself to that standard? And the times when it becomes challenging are the times that are potentially the most growthful, because that's when you're running up against your strong identifications. That's when you're running up against potentially your past traumas and stuff. And that's when the rubber really hits the road. Can I actually conduct myself in the way that I want to, rather than the way that I feel compelled to, out of sort of discomfort or out of not wanting things to be a certain way, right? Like, can I use this value? Can I aspire towards being like this person, or whoever, right? Um, and use that as like a compass, use that as a guide, especially in those times where we're really lost in emotions, when we're really overwhelmed. That's one of the
Hmm.
things I find really helpful.
Another thing that we could do if we find ourselves in a challenging situation where we're overtaken is maybe also to ask about the why, beyond the what. So, if we're thinking about, like, okay, how could I conduct myself in a situation, that's certainly helpful, but probably the most helpful thing to ask ourselves is, like, okay, why is this thing such a problem for me? Or, why am I resisting um, reality in this moment? And where that should start pointing us to is the underlying wound, right? The underlying unresolved problem from childhood or yesterday, or doesn't matter whenever it happened. But usually if we have such strong reactions, it points us to, okay, this is not a minor thing which I'm just at the moment resisting, but this is a thing which I have been resisting previously, and now it's being touched again by a situation that just has similar implications or circumstances, right? um and then you can start to perhaps work or do whatever you need to do to finish the unresolved process that is underlying there, to feel the emotion that is present there, or to integrate the traumatic experience. I mean, it could be so many things that cause these problems. But yeah, I guess that's the starting direction.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that there's kind of two things going on here. One of them is that, yeah, clearly when we have strong compulsive reactions, it is due to some sort of past experiences, past wounds, or whatever. And if you're able to get to the root of that, or even understand it to some degree, it makes it so much easier. It makes it so much lighter, right? Like, and I think it's because maybe we don't blame ourselves so much. It's like, oh, okay, well, this happened to me when I was a kid, and now I respond to this situation in this way. It's not totally my fault, but I can own it now, right? Yeah, that is so powerful. I think there are so many cases, though, at least in my experience, where I just can't get to the root of something. Like, I'm acting weird. I don't really know why this thing is bothering me, and I just can't figure it out. And in those situations, I find those so much more challenging. But what I end up doing is I just kind of like resign myself to, like, okay, this is just the way that things are. Right now it's just time for me to feel anger. I don't know why it got triggered. I don't know why it's coming up now. I'm not going to project it out. I'm not going to blame somebody else. I'm just going to sit here and feel it. And it's unpleasant, but I do find that, the more you can, like, really surrender to it, really accept it, that it gets lighter, right? And the sort of the weird part about it is the reason that we don't want to feel, say, anger is because we're afraid of what we'll do, right? I don't want to hurt somebody else because I feel angry, right? But the almost ironic part is that it's not the it's we're not actually going to do that if we allow ourselves to feel the anger through and through. If we resist feeling the anger, that's when we act out, right? And I think it's really important to understand that. Like if you totally accept a feeling like anger and allow yourself to just experience it, you're not going to lash out. If you resist it, it's that resisting. I mean, it's the lashing out is in a way like part and parcel of resistance, right? And I know that's one of the reasons I've personally struggled with anger is because I'm afraid I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret. And so I just need to repress this anger. I need it out of here. I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid I'm going to do something, right? But that fear is really unfounded from what I've discovered in my experiences. And of course, there are some nuances to it, and we're all unique, and so the way that it plays out for each person might be a little bit different. But that's been my experience.
That's that's a huge differentiation that we need to make. I think that's super important. That um, all of these reactions usually uh, they're not pointing to the problem that is underlying, but actually your resistance is what creates this like almost infinite energy, because when you're in resistance with reality, it takes a huge amount to hold that up, and I think it can create energy like rapidly, and then it takes the form of like leashing out and all these unpleasant reactions that we all witnessed in ourselves and in others. So yeah, I think that's an important information, because it points to the fact that once you actually sit down and look at the thing that is creating the initial resistance, it's usually not that bad.
Yeah.
It's for if we take an example of anger. From my experience, anger is anyways usually a cover up of other emotions.
Yeah.
So anger
Yeah.
sits on top of a disappointment, on top of a sadness, a grief. So usually, once you sit with the sadness, it doesn't last long until you're dropped into a sadness that has never been addressed. But taking it to the extreme, it could be you were really angry as an 8-year old when somebody took your toy away and you never processed that.
Yeah.
And it can, manifest later in your life in a chain of events where whenever you touched this kind of feeling and event, you pushed it down again, you pushed it deeper, deeper, deeper. And now you have this huge problem where you're leashing out at people. And once you actually sit down, you realize, okay, I just have, at the end of the day, this was a bit of sadness of an 8-year old with a little bit of a broken heart. I think that sometimes the underlying emotions are not even that bad as we anticipate,
Yeah.
or as the reactions show that they are, right.
Yeah. Oh, you hit on so many good things there. I mean, so first I'll say that I really appreciate that you mentioned that you're kind of using a lot of energy to resist these emotions, right? And we kind of wonder, I think in general in society, we tend to be kind of tired.
Hmm.
And I think one of the reasons that we're tired is because we're unconsciously using so much energy to resist feeling how we feel, right? And it's very draining, right? Like it requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of willpower to push that stuff back down. And the thing is, it's going to keep trying to come up. And that's one of the other kind of motivations for doing this work is, you can either suffer this thing, you know, once, maybe half a dozen times consciously looking through it, allowing it, accepting it, and then it won't really bother you so much anymore. Or you can suffer it repeatedly for the rest of your life, right? Like when you look at it that way, it's like I know which one I'm going to take. All right, maybe it requires a little bit of willpower to put myself through that temporary discomfort, but like you were saying, it's usually not as bad as we think. I mean, I think usually it's never as bad as we think. It's really Another thing that I've heard before that really resonated with me is it's not the emotion itself that's so uncomfortable, it's the resistance that's uncomfortable. But we've kind of conflated the two. We think that what we're feeling when we're resisting anger is anger. We're not actually feeling the anger, we're feeling our resistance.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes we also cannot reach the emotions always. You know that that's actually sometimes the problem, and it is also in my experience. And how I see this these repressed emotions is, if we want to talk about, like, if I want to express it in like a data structure, it would be like a
Mhm.
last in first out stack, where I have the feeling that the emotions are layered on top of each other inside. And now when you start to meditate and you ask yourself the question, like, why am I reacting this badly? What you get is whatever is on top, right? So the last thing that touched that topic. So you get the thing that happened yesterday. And once you release that, then you get the thing that happened 1 month ago at that birthday. And then once you release that, whatever happened at the family gathering 3 years ago. And then you go back and back and back, um, until you reach perhaps stuff from childhood or wherever it originated. But yeah, it also confirms the fact that sometimes a 30-second event, you make a lifetime problem out of it, basically, right? I mean, how stupid is that? Yet it's kind of the way we learn to deal with it. In that situation, it was never corrected, and now we walk around with all of these problems that we created, which we just amplify further and further, creating this sort of um, limited life until we make the decision of, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for my inner experience. I'm not going to try to fix stuff in the outer experience, because that is usually our solution to the problem. Is I had this fight with my coworker. I'm gonna tell him how important this shit is for us, and I'm gonna try to create uh, an outside environment in which my problem is not a problem anymore.
Yeah.
But you're
Yeah.
never addressing the actual problem. The problem is, again, like, your resistance to a fucking conflict, or whatever the thing is that is creating a problem at the moment. So it always comes back to that, and the decision to willingly work with whatever is there, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, that's so important. Yeah, it never really is. This is another thing that I'm always telling myself. It pretty much, and I know that you can definitely argue that there are exceptions to this, but sometimes I just take things to the extreme because I find it a very useful mechanism, right? I'm just using it as a tool. But I tell myself as a tool, I don't know if it's true, but as a tool, I'll tell myself something like, it's never the outside that's making me feel the way that I'm feeling, right? It's always something hit something inside of me, especially if it's something that I really don't want to feel.
Mm.
It's never the outside, and changing the outside will never fix the problem that I don't want to feel what I'm feeling right now. Life will find a way to bring that thing back up again, even if I change what triggered it this time, right? It'll just keep coming back.
Yeah, and to the problem that you mentioned earlier, that sometimes we cannot reach it. I think it's still valuable to try and use every chance when it does come up, and release stuff, because maybe you'll only release one layer of it, but even that will create relaxation in the system, because what we talked about, that a lot of energy is necessary to keep all of that stuff down. From my experience, when we slowly start to unpack this stuff, it creates less tension in the system, less energy is required. We become lighter, and all of that energy is suddenly available for, well, more important tasks at hand. Just imagine if you get to the pit, of all of the accumulated resistances that you have, and you free all of that space in your body and in your mind. I mean, from my perspective, I think we would have like almost infinite energy to do, infinite creativity, infinite inspiration, infinite life force, basically, to do all the things. Yet we wasted on holding all of this shit down, uh, as if it's some life important stuff, and most of the time it's not. It's like
Yeah,
stupid stuff
yeah.
from childhood or whatever.
So much of everything that we're seeking, I want to feel better. I want to feel more energetic. I want to be happy. I want to be joyful. I just want to feel well. All of those things are just beneath the surface of the things that we don't want to feel, right? It's there. It's there for us. We don't have to go out and do anything. We don't have to I mean, not that I'm saying that you shouldn't, but we don't have to go to the gym. We don't have to do all of these other things to try and force it to happen, force ourselves to feel a certain way. It's just beneath the surface, especially with things like joy. I've personally found, and just the ability to laugh and enjoy myself, all of that stuff that I'd been looking for and felt like I'd lost. I felt for the longest time, for probably a decade or more, I felt like I couldn't really laugh. I felt like I didn't enjoy things so much, and I didn't know why. And now that I've discovered why, and I've discovered the ability to enjoy myself so much more, I realized that it was just all these things that I was repressing that I didn't want to feel. I'll bring this quote up again. I've probably said it half a dozen times on the podcast already, but I really like it, and it comes from, I'll throw it out there, Joe Hudson, the Art of Accomplishment podcast. So check him out for sure. But joy is the matriarch of emotions. And if you don't allow her children in, then joy will not enter. And her children are all the other emotions, including anger, jealousy, sadness, depression, everything. The more that we can accept those, the more that we will start to feel the way that we want to feel. And similar to how I mentioned earlier, we're afraid of feeling our depression because we're afraid that it'll consume us. Any emotion that we're afraid of is usually because we're afraid it'll consume us and cause us to do things or be ways that we don't want to be. But the truth is, it's the resistance to that emotion that causes you to be the way that you don't want to be. And that's a hard lesson to learn. The way to learn that lesson is to observe, be aware, kind of be open to that possibility. Don't take my word for it. Go experiment. You won't actually be able to embody these things until you experience it firsthand, right? And the only way to do that is to try.
Yeah, I think that joy can be repressed very, very easily, and that's important information for people when we talk about repressed emotions. Perhaps people, or at least I had the idea before, that we're talking about, just negative emotions, just about like shame, guilt, and all of this stuff. Oh my God, I have to deal with all of that when I start my shadow work. But it can also be that you're cut off from your personal joy, life force, creativity, because it's buried under some unconscious conflict. To give you an example, like in my first ayahuasca ceremony, while all the people in the room were like purging through puking, I was dying laughing for like almost 2 hours. I was just like laughing. I was crying, laughing. I released so much suppressed joy. And it was a beautiful experience, but it was also horrifying to see, oh my God, I was cut off from this lightness and from this joy for so many years. And it was there all the time, but, not reachable for me. So that's also a beautiful thing when you start to do this work, that, your joy comes back, your life force comes back, your motivation
Yeah.
comes
Oh,
back, all of these
absolutely.
good things as
Yeah,
well.
I totally agree. We do think that, it's the negative emotions that are repressed, but it is some of the positive ones. It's some of the really high positive ones that are repressed as well. And at least for me, they're repressed out of fear. And that fear came about probably, as so many things in childhood, right? When you were a kid and you were really, really happy, and that really bothered someone, and they took it out on you in one way or another, and you learned that joy was not safe, right? That's
Yeah.
that's so true. I mean, it's you know, or in another sense, it's you're afraid of somebody, just walking all over your joy. You're afraid of being made fun of. Well, why are you so happy? Or something like that, right? You're afraid of what somebody else thinks about you if you express your joy, and that is, oh boy, it's a tragedy. you
Hmm.
know
Such a tragic thing to cut off from, especially from a child, or to make a child feel vulnerable in the most natural state that should exist for them, in the state that they should indulge them, that should drive them to cut that off from them, is very tragic. Yet I really do see that a lot, and
Oh, yeah.
it is happening. I think especially also with depression, that this is one of the first things that you cut yourself off from, and you become numb to. So it is definitely unfortunate. Trying to tie this a little bit back to kind of the original question of like, how do we actually embody spirituality? Now we talked about how we can go down the path of well, looking at these old patterns, blockages, unresolved stuff, and then ideally, I mean, so that's one layer. So, and that's work that you probably do on the side that maybe you're not even able to do so much in the moment. But usually, that's something where you set time for it, perhaps in meditation, in shadow work, in therapy, whatever the modality is that is available for you to work with. But then there's this other layer of, we also want to practice not getting stuck, like not creating new imprints
Yeah.
that are getting stuck in our body, right? Because so we created all these old stuff that we have to attend to. So we have to attend to like half a lifetime of stuff we need to get rid of that we're like walking around with in our backpacks. At the same time, probably we want to develop the skill of at least not resisting reality, the new reality anymore, so we don't create this new stuff. So that's actually another practice that I definitely do daily, where I try to consciously not get stuck and resist situations.
What does that practice look like?
Just noticing the tendencies that we talked about,
Yeah.
but even the subtle ones. So not only the stuff where you're getting very triggered, but in any kind of situation, any kind of discussion is not going in the direction you want to. And there's resistance, and you want to actually take the discussion back in the direction you were wanting it to go. So don't resist it. Just accept the fact that this is where this discussion is going, and and see what that brings, and small things like that. And I think it works like that with almost everything. And yeah, so that you develop this muscle of letting stuff go and not being involved with it, and being okay with whatever a situation brings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, one of the best ways that I started practicing that, and this all comes from Michael Singer, and he's real big on start with the low hanging fruit, start with the stuff that is, your day to day stuff. So for me, when I started practicing surrender, maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 years or so ago, the place where I practiced it the most was when I was driving, because maybe 5, 6 years ago, I was kind of a bit of a road rager,
Hmm.
and I was able to really curb that pretty significantly through meditation and other techniques. And I knew that I didn't want to be that way. Right. So I was able to more or less internalize it, but it was kind of forceful and there was a little bit of repression going on there. Once I learned more about surrender, I started working with it, just constantly. And I mean, I drive every day pretty much. So, and usually there's a little bit of traffic, or inevitably there's someone, driving the way that I don't want them to be driving, and they're in front of me, or whatever. Right. And that's a perfect opportunity. And the way to do it, or at least the way that I found was effective to do it, was, and I know it sounds so mundane, maybe even so simplistic, but honestly, it works really well if you're consistent and practice it a lot. And that's just relaxing, right? I'd be sitting in traffic. I knew that I couldn't change the fact that I'm sitting in traffic, and I'd notice, myself getting angry or something, and just tell myself to relax, maybe take a breath, extend my exhale a little bit, anything that I could do to just calm down. And I'd just do it over and over. My mantra would just be like, just just relax, and dropping the shoulders, loosening the muscles in the face, and just doing that over and over and over and over and over again. And so many opportunities all the time. And when I slip up, when I get angry or something, I wouldn't beat myself up about it, right? I think that's important, because when we do have some of these high standards, there is a tendency to beat yourself up when you don't hold yourself up to it. But that's just another way of avoiding what you're working with. But quite honestly, it's amazing. In retrospect, sometimes I even find it hard to believe how far I've come in terms of addressing that anymore. I mean, I'm happy in traffic now. I'm happy to just sit there. Oh, it's a perfect opportunity. Look, there's some cool cars to look at over there. I'm listening to a good podcast. I'm listening to a good book, and I just don't. It doesn't bother me like at all anymore. It's almost weird, but it's super effective. And then that starts kind of spidering out into other parts of your life, and you just start using that technique just all the time, everything, and it's life changing. It's made a significant change for me in my life. I'm so much happier than I had been. Yeah, it's good
Mm.
stuff.
Yeah, this is the work. Like, especially if you have like a pet peeve, or if you have this one
Yeah.
thing that that triggers you always, like, take that thing first and like start working with that. You're gonna make the biggest progress there, and keep on working with it. And I think this is the commitment that we are gonna keep on working with this stuff potentially forever. Which
Yeah.
brings me to one question that I wanted to ask you. Like, I discussed this with my wife, I think yesterday. We talked about this, that this whole thing of releasing emotions can feel like a bottomless pit.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'm also asking myself, like, will this go on forever, or like, how does it work? Because I mean, obviously, I am seeing a lot of progress, even in myself, for example, because I've been doing this thing like intensely for at least the last 2 years. And if I
Yeah.
look at myself like 2 years ago and today, I am a completely different person. I am so
Yeah.
much more lightweight. So many things in my life have changed. I've become more authentic, and I'm still practicing that. Yet I still see that there's still big unresolved topics that are still ahead of me. And sometimes I'm thinking, like, does it ever end? Or is this the thing that we're now doing forever? We're just like, getting, or stuff is getting hit and then we release it, or stuff is getting hit and then we release it. Like, is that the motion that we're going to be in
Mm.
until the end of this life? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I definitely have some speculation around that
Mm.
from various things that I've read and my own sort of ideas. So first, I'd maybe invert the imagery, and rather than calling it a bottomless pit, I would call it like an infinite mountain or something, or make
Mm.
like a video game analogy, and it's like an RPG, and there are endless enemies to gain experience from, so you can, there's no level cap essentially,
Mm.
right? That's one way I might put it. Um, you know, in my experience, I haven't gotten to a point where I'm just like, okay, I'm good now. If I were to kind of speculate or approach it from a more theoretical perspective, I would imagine, say that what we're really working through, just for sake of talking about it this way, we'll say that it's karma, right?
Mhm.
And once you exhaust that, you've essentially ascended completely to the point where you're back with the unity. There is no more distinction. There is no more separation, right? So in a way, you could see all these things that we're working through as separation, right? And once you've totally gotten rid of the separation, I mean, of course, you as the way that you are now will no longer exist. But I see that as sort of like the path of ascension in a way. Um, is it endless? Is it infinite? I don't know. It's kind of exciting to think that it is infinite, because as we're going through this process and life is becoming more enjoyable, I, I'd like to think that there isn't a ceiling to that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that would also mean that we will get incredibly high if you want so, right? Because I mean, already now the progress I'm seeing, and the ability to allow also positive feelings, has increased so much that, I mean, obviously all of the stuff is painful as well, and looking at the stuff is, there are so many things I'd rather do, but it opens the possibility to also feel positive feelings, and if that keeps on increasing, I mean, it's not a bad journey to be on after all. And regarding the mountain image, I find it interesting because I started reading a book which is called The Geometry of the Soul, and
Hmm.
the author, who's a psychologist, describes these kind of karmic waves or whatever as being oh god, I'm forgetting the word is slipping my mind. The way that is that in nature every form is almost expressed, which keeps repeating itself in,
Like a spiral, or
yeah, not spiral. What is the word for it?
like the golden ratio.
Almost there. It's on top of my mind. I'm probably gonna remember it in like 30 seconds, and then be like, "What the fuck?" But what I wanted to say is that it has this motion of sort of smaller branches leading into bigger branches, right? And
Hmm.
then it repeats itself, kind of like a Mandelbrot, uh,
Hmm.
if you
Yeah.
want to. And that's kind of the underlying theory, that I guess we have to ride these emotional or karmic waves until the end, until we hit the big wave, right? So it comes as like a small wave, and then a bigger wave, and then an even bigger wave, and then it subsides at one point. And yeah, that's an interesting perspective, because in my mind, at least, it looks a little bit like the endless mountain that you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. Fractal. Is
Fractal.
fractal?
Thank you. I was looking
Yes.
for fractal. Yeah.
Yeah. When you said Mandelbrot, I was like, I
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. Cool. Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to end it. I don't know if I have anything else to say now.
Yeah. True. But yeah, I think that's also a good end to this episode, and was super interesting. Thanks for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
conversation.
Totally.